Hello, this is Deborah Yao with Redirecting, and I'm going to be referencing a passage of scripture that is being presented as proof that we are to be exiled or returned back to Africa before going into Israel or Jerusalem. I'm going to go over this because I want there to be clarification to this. Whenever studying scripture, you should always read more than just a few verses. First of all, thank you to the sister who shared this. I see that you've shared it a number of times, but I would like to address it because I don't want our people to be confused. Whenever studying or reading scripture, you should always read whole chapters and find other things, other precepts to go along with it, because prophecy has to make sense. We should never try to make it fit, but it has to make sense, because there are other prophecies that completely go against the narrative that is being promoted right now. And so we have to understand that things have to fit, because that would totally wipe out other prophecies and just make them null and void. I'm going to start I'm not going to read the whole chapter here, but I'm going to read the highlights. It says in verse 4, okay, we're reading from Jeremiah 29, the 29th chapter. I'm going to start at verse 4. It says, "This is what the Most High, Elohim of Israel, says to all of those I carried away into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." Okay, note that it says that I carried into exile from Jerusalem into Babylon. So it establishes early on that he carried us away in exile from Jerusalem. So this is from our homeland. And then when you go down further to, I'm going to start at the 13th verse. It goes on to say, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart." Have we done that yet? No, we have not. Then it goes on to say, "I will be found of you, declares Yahuwah, and I will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I banished you, declares Yah, and I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile." Now, let's go back up to verse 4. He tells you from which he carried us into exile. It says, say to those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. And so now let's go back down to 14. So it was already established in verse 4 that he carried us away into captivity or into exile from Jerusalem. Now 14 says, "I will be found of you, declares Yahuwah, and I will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I banished you." Banished means sent into exile, declares Yahuwah, "and I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile." That is Jerusalem, family. There is not going to be that in-between place. Africa. Now, if you want to go to Africa, keep in mind that our people live all over the planet pretty much. We live in all kinds of places. There are hundreds of millions of us right now in the diaspora. The Most High in Scripture, there is not showing that there's going to be a mass exodus back to Africa of hundreds of millions of people in the diaspora. That is not shown in Scripture. But what is shown in Scripture is where he's going to take us back to the place from which he took us into exile from Jerusalem. Look at those two together. Verse 4 and verse 14. He tells you from where he's going to take us into exile. And then he says he's going to bring us back to the place from which he carried us into exile. So he's going to take us from our lands of captivity and put us back in our own land, right? But that takes place at a certain time. This is why I say you need to look at other prophecies as well. There are other prophecies that tells you that in the last days, when he puts us back in our own land, he says it's going to be a Garden of Eden before us and desolation behind us. He's going to judge all of these other nations. They are going to, the scripture also tells us that these other nations are going to fund our return to Jerusalem. These other nations are going to do that. It didn't say that we were going to invest in something and go back to Africa as an in-between place. It didn't state that at all, right? But then we have to look at this main prophecy that the scripture talks about. When the end comes and it's all said and done, he says that he is going to gather us from the four corners of the earth. From the four corners of the earth. So all over the earth is where he's going to gather us from. He didn't say that he was going to gather us all from Africa, because all hundreds of millions of us exiled back to Africa or went back into Africa. He didn't say that. When he gathers us, we are going to be all over the earth. That's why he says he's going to gather us from the four corners of the earth. Now, I'm saying this, family, just for clarification. I don't want anyone to be hurt or offended by this, because I am not trying to discourage you from moving to Africa, family. Because again, we are going to be gathered from the four corners of the earth. So we know that we're going to be gathered from Africa too, because the scripture already tells us that Israel is going to be gathered from beyond the rivers of Cush. Beyond the rivers of Cush. So we know that a lot of the Israelites are going to be gathered from there, but it says, but Judah from the four corners of the earth. So at the same time, Yah is gathering us to put us back in our land of Jerusalem, our land in Israel. He's also going to gather the other tribes as well. You see, so that makes more sense, because when he gathers us, notice he says, I'm going to gather the other tribes from beyond the rivers of Cush, being Africa, but Judah from the four corners of the earth. So the end time gathering of the Israelites, we are all going to be gathered and pushed back into our land, or placed back into our land by the Most High. He says that he's going to take us from the lands of our exile and captivity and put us back from the place which he exiled us. So I hope that brings a lot more clarification. Some of these other scriptures need to be looked at as well, because prophecy has to fit. We can't make it fit. And that one verse, in the verse 14, certainly does not prove that we are to return to Africa. That is not what that proves. But again, if you want to go there, if that's where you want to be, so be it, because I want to be there too, family. Guess what? I definitely do. Me and my family, we would love to be there, but this is not that prophecy, family. Not that prophecy at all. When the Most High says he's going to put us back in our land, he's talking about our land, in which is going to be a Garden of Eden before us and desolation behind us, and we shall study war no more. Now, if we go back into Africa right now, war is not going to stop. They're still going to be over there pillaging, because it's going to take a lot to get those other people out of there. They're setting up roots there. They're having babies there with some of the indigenous population to stake claim to the land. I mean, they're doing all kinds of shenanigans right now. So this is certainly not what the Most High prophesied. This is not what the word is talking about. Look at everything. This is not it, family. This is nothing more than our desire to be among our own people, which is perfectly fine. But if you are trying to be in alignment with end time prophecy, you better look at the book a lot closer and get a greater understanding of what it is saying, because it is what it is when the scripture says that Judah is going to be gathered from the four corners of the earth and Israel from beyond the rivers of Cush. That is not what would be taking place if we are all to return to Africa right now. So then who would he be gathering from the four corners of the earth if we were all in Africa? Just something to think about, family, something to think about. And with that, I will say I love you and shalom.